Thank you very much for attending. My name is Mark Haggerty. I'm the floodplain manager here at the City of Doral, and we appreciate your interest on the flood post-disaster permit process for flood. The reason that we're having this presentation is when we have a disaster, there's a lot more permits that need to be issued. You know, we normally process about 1,000 permits a month, and we have the staff to accommodate that. In times of a storm, we could get as many 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 permit applications a month. So we want to accustom you to the documentation that we need to be compliant with FEMA, and we're trying to get you to prepare some of that documentation on your own, so when you come here, we don't hold up your permit. We can bump you right to the front of the line and get your permit done because you're going to help us out by providing some documentation. So that's the goal of our presentation this morning. So we're going to take you through a couple of things. First, the National Flood Insurance Program. 23,000 communities throughout the United States participate. This is a requirement that we comply with all FEMA regulations, and we are the entity in charge of making sure that anybody who builds here in Doral builds to the minimum standard of the National Flood Insurance Program. And in exchange for that, the last paragraph there, the federal government makes flood insurance available to you and also provides grants. And the grant money is the big thing. If we don't participate in this, then we don't get grants to do storm drainage, to do retrofitting of your property in case it gets damaged by flood. We're not eligible for that federal funding if we don't participate in this program. So this is an important thing that we stay compliant with this program, or we'll lose that eligibility for the grant money. Definition of flood. A flood is a general temporary condition of complete or partial inundation of generally dry land. And the key there is overland, okay? If the water comes up from underneath or runs in, if it comes down from the sky, that's not flood insurance, okay? If it comes down from the sky, builds up and then goes in, that's overland as well. So the definition is there. It's important to remember floods can be slow or fast rising. You never really know. You could get a flash flood, or it could develop over a long period of time. Like people in North Carolina, the rain came and sat over the top of them for 3 days. And it was a slow period, and first day, no problem. Second day, no problem. Third day, they're flooded. So it's important to understand that flooding could be either quick or it could be a long, prolonged event. What are my chances of flooding? Your chances of flooding, believe it or not, are 1 in 4 chance during a 30-year life of your mortgage. So that's a 25% chance you're going to flood over your 30-year mortgage. The big statistic here is 5 times more likely to experience a flood than fire. Most people don't realize that. Fire's been doing a great job mitigating, a lot of fire safety, and it's up to us to make sure that we bring flood up, and we want to change that statistic because if you see here at the bottom, it says you don't have to live in a high-risk zone to be a victim. Nationally, 25% of all flood claims come from people that live outside FEMA's high-risk zones. And here in the city, it's actually higher. We're doing a study right now, and the consultants' initial numbers are saying that we're close to 35 or 38% of flooding to structures happens outside FEMA's high-risk zones. So it's very important that we pay attention that even though FEMA hasn't identified these as zones that are high risk, they're still flooding. And that's 25% over the country, and you know, our initial numbers from our consultants are telling us it's going to be even higher here in the city. Six key tips for flood safety. These are the 6 topics that FEMA always wants us to talk about. They're topics that you should really learn. Number 1 is know your hazard. Do you know what flood zone you're in? Are you in a high-risk zone? Are you in a moderate-risk zone? Are you in a low-risk zone? Remember, a low-risk zone, you still might have a problem. But you need to understand that because you need to get insurance for your property. So, you know, is it federally required? If you're in a high-risk zone, it's federally required. If you're in a moderate or low-risk zone, it's up to you. Obviously, the flood insurance is a lot cheaper. You can get a flood insurance policy outside the high-risk zone for about $300 to $400 a year. okay? And the average damage, flood claim damage is about $80,000. So for $300 a year, you could get, you know, you could really save yourself. So know your hazard. If you don't know what your flood zone is, call us. You call me, you can send me an email. We provide the information to you. We may have an elevation certificate on file for you. If you want us to speak with your insurance agent, no problem. Give us your contact information so we'll be able to, so you'll know your zone. Second is insurance. I touched on it already. Flood insurance is important. You should carry it. You should carry it whether you live in a high-risk zone or whether you don't. FEMA recommends everybody carries it, and again, it's a much more affordable rate if you live in a low-risk zone. So it's something that you need to consider. Protection from floods. Personal protection. You know, the big thing that everybody talks about is turn around, don't drown. As little as 1 foot of water can sweep you away into the floodwaters. And if you see around the country, you see people getting lost and you see these cars being swept out. 1 foot of water can sweep away a car that's moving water. So be very careful. Turn around, don't drown. If you are going towards and you see a deep puddle after a big storm, you don't know where it is. We have a lot of drainage canals around here, and when the water gets really deep, you don't know where the street is and where the canal is. So you could easily go off the street and end up in the canal, and that's just what happens to a lot of people. So protection, personal protection from floods. The other thing about floodwater is everybody says, oh, no problem, I'll swim or whatever. It's very dirty water. It's contaminated water. It has sewage. It has all sorts of things in it because everything is backing up and nothing's working. It has animals in it, full of bacteria. So don't let your kids go out and play in the floodwaters. Let them recede, let them go, and then you can go back out. And that's how you can protect yourself from floods. Protect your property. Well, there's a couple things you can do. The city gives out sandbags. You know, if you have your garage or something that you know the water gets close to going in, you can use sandbags. There are other more permanent things you can do. You can elevate your property, but you need to take a look and see what you can do to make sure that if you're repetitive flooding, either one of your houses or your businesses have flooding issues currently?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay, where are you located?
82nd and 25th to 12th
Okay.
Avenue.
Okay.
And 79th as well.
Yeah. So, but not in the building though, right? Street flooding, right?
Street flooding.
Street flooding. Okay, yeah. Street flooding is an issue, and that's why we're working with the Public Works Department to make sure that they're always constantly trying to upgrade and increase the storm sewer. But technically, that's really what we're trying to do. We want to keep the water out of the buildings and protect the property and protect lives. I know that when the street floods, it's a nuisance, it's difficult for access, but really we're trying to keep the water out of the building, and we're doing everything we can from the public works side to try and get that street flooding resolved. The other thing, we need you to build responsibly. Come to us when you need a permit so we can make sure that you're building high enough and in the right location to make sure that you're not going to have any issues with flooding. You know, we're going to meet the minimum design requirements for FEMA, and you should be protected. The other thing is protect the natural floodplain functions. This is, and if you're a commercial, we would really like your help with this, is to watch your tenants, okay? Don't dump gasoline or oil down the storm drains, okay? We're in Florida. Our water comes from our aquifer, which is below us. All our storm drains flow out into lakes, rivers, and the ocean. That all goes down into our water table and then comes up, and we end up drinking it. And we have to treat that water. So it's very important that we need to do and protect that by not dumping substances into our storm drains or just pouring it out onto the ground or into the grass, okay? And that will protect the ecosystem as well as our water quality issues. Okay, these are some shots that we're going to show you from Houston, Hurricane Harvey in 2017, okay? This was one of their major expressways. You can liken it to either the Palmetto or the Turnpike, okay? And this was an exit there. And then after Hurricane Harvey came through, that's what the that's what the expressway looked like. And that's what the exit looked like. So, you know, obviously you can't do business if you can't access. So it brings a tremendous amount of water in a short period of time. Okay. You see this drainage canal here going through a residential area. Many canals we have around, you know, we have 25th Street Canal, we have 41st Street Canal, we have 97th Avenue Canal, we have 117th Avenue canals, okay? And it's very similar to this. This is what it looked like before Harvey, and that's what it looked like after Harvey. So imagine our canal system if we had that sort of backup here, what impact it may have. Okay, and this is another mixed-use area, residential and commercial. There's the drainage there, and this is August 26th, so it was not too bad, but then by August 27th, it was completely inundated. So this is one of those slow developing long-terms, oh, I'm okay, look, you look outside on the 26th, you think you're okay, and the next day you wake up and you have water in your house. So, you know, if you're told to evacuate or relocate, please do it. Please do it. And this is the downtown commercial area. You can see all nice and dry. You can see all the streets. And then following day, most of the streets are gone. The only thing you can see is the major, it's all underwater. All the buildings have been affected. All the commercial work obviously is stopped. There's no access. Flooding can happen anywhere. We touched on this before, not just in high-risk areas. 98% of the counties have experienced a flooding event. People outside of the high-risk areas also need to be prepared. Right now, they aren't. Take a look at this statistic. 81% of the owners of Hurricane Harvey damaged properties outside the flood high-risk areas did not have a flood insurance policy. Okay, 81% that got damaged didn't have a flood insurance policy. And then if you look at that following, they say, okay, well, no problem. We'll get individual disaster assistance from the federal government. They'll give me $34,000. Doesn't work that way. They will give you up to $34,000. And this is a real world example. Harris County, Texas, the average NFIP insurance claim, if you had flood insurance, was $113,000. If you didn't have flood insurance, FEMA gave that homeowner $4,000 to fix his house. And if it costs $70,000 to $80,000 to fix your house, if you had a flood insurance policy, you have more than enough money to do the repair. If you don't have a flood insurance policy, you got $4,000 to fix your house. So that's a glaring statistic coming out of Harvey. And again, the decision to buy flood insurance shouldn't be based on a line on a map. Just because FEMA doesn't say you're in a high-risk area doesn't mean you're not going to flood. Consider flood insurance. Okay, well you say, okay, well that was Harvey and that was somewhere else, but we chose Harvey and we chose Houston because Doral is very similar. We're inland, but we're coastal, but we're not really coastal. But the water can come a long way. We actually are in a storm surge area in this building, believe it or not, all the way from the coast. It goes out to 87th Avenue, the storm surge area, and further south of 25th Street, it goes all the way to 97th Avenue. Okay, so the other threat we have is Lake Okeechobee. And everybody says, well, Lake Okeechobee, that's so far away, it's not going to be an issue. Well, it is, because these canals all run out to drain the lake into the Atlantic Ocean. This Miami Canal runs along US 27 on our northern border. Okay, and this is it, and it runs right through Doral. And the statistic here is that this lake can fill up 6 times faster than these can release the water. So the problem with that is, if you remember New Orleans Katrina in 2004, their dams and their dikes and their levees failed, and they got a rush of water. Well, if Lake Okeechobee can fill up 6 times faster than it can be drained, there's a potential of a catastrophic loss like that. And all that water is going to come down here. And just imagine these canals swelling to what I showed you earlier in Houston. So this is the real threat that we have to worry about even here, even inland. And here's why. Here's that Miami Canal that comes all the way from Lake Okeechobee, this is Doral here. But if you notice, all our canals that I mentioned earlier, 41st Street, 97th, 170, are all tied into this. So when this backs up and swells, all of that will swell as well. And that's the risk that we're here. So we need to make sure that when we build new or substantially improve, that we meet the minimum elevation requirements, so the building won't be affected by a flood. Okay, these are some pictures of around town. This is the Vanderbilt area. I don't know if you're familiar, 25th Street, between 97th and 102. That's one of those canals that's connected. And we have residential and commercial there. If that swells, we're going to be affected. This is right here, just south of here. This is the new downtown Doral South development. This is Doral Gardens, 79th, and this is 41st Street. And there's that 41st Street canal that also connects to that. If that swells and spreads, we're going to have some issues. We need to make sure that we're building compliant. This is the Finger Lakes area. It's close to where you guys are. Obviously, we also have an issue here, which is unique than any other area of the country. We're built on limestone and rock, and unfortunately the water comes up from underneath as well. So as that water comes up, our water table rises due, all these will spill out also, okay? So the risk is real here, and this is why we're going through what we do. If your property is damaged by flood, or by anything, by wind, by any means, we are required, as part of our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program, to do several things before we just issue your permit. We need to take a look at your property. We need to make sure that you don't exceed 50% of the existing value of the individual building without meeting the current elevation requirements, okay? So this is in our code, and what the first step that we have to do is we have to get the market value of your existing building, okay? When we do that, we're not property appraisers, we're not tax assessors, so what we use is the Miami-Dade County Tax Assessor's Office, right? Property appraiser, and they have a value for the building, we use that value for the building, and we make our calculations and make sure that we're being compliant. The second step is we need a contract from your contractor, whoever's going to be rebuilding, so we can take a look at how much money it's going to cost to fix your structure against the Miami-Dade County property appraiser, and to make sure we don't exceed that 50% value. And step 3 is determine whether it constitutes, and step 4 is then we'll tell you, yes, your permit's ready, you're not 50%, or yes, you're 50%, we need to go a step further and see what your elevation is. If your elevation is already high enough, then that's okay, you're compliant, you can still go forward, but that would be the 4th step in our notification process for this permit. There's one little caveat with that. We do have what's called a higher regulatory standard here. We want to make sure that we're going to be resilient and that you're going to be protected. So while FEMA says that we're going to just look at it on a one-time basis, is it 50% of that one repair or improvement, we count them for 5 years. So any work you do against your structure, we're going to count that. And if your structure is worth $100,000 and in 2015 you do $25,000 worth of improvement, say do a new kitchen, and then in 2018 you're damaged by $25,000, then you will meet the standard of substantial because you'll be at 50%. And I have an example coming, so to hope you'll understand a little bit better what I'm talking about. The documentation that we need in order to process the permits is this. And what we're asking you to do is to try and get some of this documentation together, because it's all available on websites, and I asked if you had your emails listed because I'm going to email you all these links where you can go and get this documentation. And what we're going to ask you to do is get this documentation together, because when you come in for a permit, be it an improvement or damage, we can process you quicker if you've already got that paperwork. So we can slide you right through, oh yeah, look, boom, boom, boom. We don't have to go and get it. We don't have to, we can put it all together. And that's especially important when it comes to post-disaster, and that's what we're talking about. Because we have a line of 8,000 people out there, and we have to go compile this documentation for each one. It takes a long time to do that. So if you can help us and be ready and bring this documentation in, it will cut down tremendously on your permit processing times. Again, we talked about the county appraiser's office. That's the first thing. We need that. A flood zone determination. We need to know whether you're in a high-risk zone or not a high-risk zone. Again, you can put your address in on a FEMA website, and it will print out and tell you exactly what it is. The third thing is obviously you can't get that now, but you would need a contract for your construction. If you're doing an improvement, you're entering into an agreement with a contractor, they're going to give you a contract. We need that documentation to provide to FEMA to prove what that amount of money is being spent on improving your structure. Recommended documentation, and it says may be required there, is an elevation certificate. We recommend that you have an elevation certificate for every building that you have or you own. The reason being is we can look at that elevation certificate and tell you immediately, do you meet the code or do you not meet the code? If you meet the code and you want to get a permit and you have an elevation certificate that shows you already meet the code, boom. I don't need to check how much money you're spending. We don't need any of that because you're already compliant. There's nothing else you're going to have to do from flood. So we really recommend, for your protection and for your insurance purposes, so you can talk with your insurance agent and say, hey, look, here's my elevation certificate. I'm compliant. Let's take a look at my rates and make sure I'm not overpaying here. So that's a very important document. They run generally about $200 to $300 from any licensed land surveyor, but we do have elevation certificates on file here as well as Miami-Dade County. Miami-Dade County started tracking elevation certificates and keeping them in about 1996. If your building was built before then, you may or may not have one in the county records, okay? The Doral was incorporated in 2004. We joined the CRS program in 2008. So we have elevation certificates from any building that was built 2008 or later, okay? So again, I'm going to be reaching out to you with an email, and you're going to have an opportunity to come in and meet one-on-one with me to go over all this documentation at a later date. So hopefully you'll take advantage of that so we can do an assessment of your risk and know and get you on the right track for in case of an event. The other thing is an appraisal. It's difficult in a damage situation for an appraisal, but if you don't agree with what Miami-Dade County has listed as the market value for your structure, you can appeal that and you can go out and get a Florida licensed appraiser to do an appraisal on that building. And then we are allowed to use that value in place of the Miami-Dade County value, okay? So what we're gonna ask you is if you're gonna put that documentation together, always check with us before you contract with anybody to make sure that the documentation that you pay for is gonna meet the requirements for acceptance. And that's gonna be on a coming up slide, I'll show you. Here's the property appraiser's record. You may or may not be familiar with this. This is what we use for value. This is the section that you get the value from. And be careful because a lot of people will look at these and say, oh look, my market value is $16 million. Well, that's true, but FEMA doesn't insure or pay for your land. They'll only insure the building. So we need to use the building value, okay? The current building value, and that in this case would be $11 million and change. That happens to be the value of this building and where you're sitting. So if this building was damaged by more than $7 million, then it would be considered a substantially damaged building. And this is how the calculation works. We provide all this documentation to FEMA to show that we are enforcing their regulations. This is a standard contract for construction. It looks many different forms, but the area on any contract will always show a contract amount. That's the other document that we need to prove that you have provided us the information necessary to be compliant with FEMA. The damage calculation works like this, okay? Take the value of the building and you divide it into the repair amount, okay? And in this particular example, the contract for damage repair was $25,000. Divided by 100,000, it's 25%. You're not substantially improved. We've done all the paperwork we need to do to issue your permit. We're compliant with FEMA, we can issue your permit, no problem. In this case, we talked about cumulative, we count them for 5 years. So here's the example we were talking about before. In 2015, you did $25,000 worth of work. In 2018, you had $25,000 worth of damage. Your structure was worth, you meet that 50%, which means now that you're gonna have to give me an elevation certificate to prove you're compliant, and if that elevation certificate shows you're not compliant, then you're gonna have to retrofit your building to make sure it meets the minimum requirements of FEMA, okay? And these are how these calculations work. This is all things that we have to do on the backside when you come in to apply for a permit. This is what we do in order to be compliant with that NFIP community standard. And again, it goes back to the 23,000 communities. And the important thing is here, if we don't do this, if we waive these requirements and say, well, we can't do it, we're going to lose the eligibility of grant funding and flood insurance here in the city. So it's not an option. So this is something that we need to comply with. We are complying with, and we need to continue to comply with even in times of disaster. We need to go through these processes for each and every permit. Again, how can you help reduce the processing times? By putting the documentation together that we talked about. The Miami-Dade County Property Appraiser, the flood zone determination, and the contract. If you have those 3 documents when you come in for a permit to improve your structure, put a new roof on, or in case of damage, we can process your permit that much quicker. Again, we recommend about the elevation certificate. It's a very important document. If you don't have them, we really recommend you get them. Look in the county, look in our records. If we don't have them, we recommend you consider getting elevation certificates for each one of your buildings, so you'll truly understand the risk associated with possible inundation. And the other one we talked about is an appraisal. Please remember there may be thousands of damaged buildings in need of repair, okay? To remain compliant with the FEMA requirements, we need to evaluate, and I showed you the process of what we need to do, each and every permit. Additional resources will be deployed. The mayor and council and the management understand the gravity of this program, and they're behind this program 100%. We're very fortunate. We have 18 individuals that are certified to process this. Now, there's only 2 of us that work on this full time, but there are 16 other individuals that are certified to sign off on permits, and our CFM, our certified floodplain managers on staff here. And those additional resources of those people will be retasked to help us issue permits to try and get that backlog down should there ever be an event. So we're looking out for that, but please be patient. Understand that, we have a staff, we have limited resources. We process 1,000 permits a month, and if we get hit with 8,000 or 10,000 permits in a month, it's going to take a while. But we do understand it. We do have additional resources in the wings waiting for that to happen. We're prepared for that. But again, you can help us by providing that documentation. And if you do provide that documentation, you'll go right to the front of the line. Why? Because we can process you quickly. And one of the junior people that doesn't work on this every day can pencil whip that permit right out, because all your documentation will be there. We won't need to go to a higher level of investigation to go and pull all that documentation. Okay, so we're hoping you'll take advantage of that and provide some of the documentation. Elevation certificates we talked about, depending on when your building was built. We may have one on file here. There may be one on file in Miami-Dade County. If you were built before '96, there's an excellent chance that there's no certificate on record for you, unfortunately. And again, if it's not on file, you can contact any licensed land surveyor, and they will come out and do it. And in your case, are your PS business parks? Yes. Okay. You have multiple buildings, so you could call, and there's local anywhere throughout the state, any state licensed one you can use, but there are surveyors here in Doral. So if you'd like to use a local, I'm sure they'd be happy to do it for you. And they will come out, and since you have a large park with multiple buildings, their pricing is be based on that. You wouldn't have to pay a per building price. So there is some pricing accommodations that the surveyors will make on a big project like that. So you can reach out to them if you don't have certificates and see what it might cost for you guys to get certificates on each one. The big thing, we talked about appraisal, but the big thing is at the bottom. Before you pay anybody any money to do anything, please talk to us about it so we can reach out to the surveyor and say, hey, listen, this is the information we're going to need, because the last thing we want you to do is pay for an elevation certificate and it has the incomplete information. You bring it to me and it doesn't have the information we need. Surveyors are experts on surveying and elevations. They're not experts on filling out the federal forms, okay? So when they submit them to us, we want to make sure that they're going to be compliant with FEMA and do what you paid them to do. So reach out to us and we'll be happy to call your surveyor and say, look, this is what we're going to need, and work with them to get a certificate that will be compliant, that we can use to ensure that it has all the information we need on it, okay? The same thing goes for an appraisal, because there's certain language that appraisers use that FEMA won't accept. So if you do go the appraisal route, it's very important that we speak with the appraiser one-on-one so they understand and provide the documentation required and the language required for acceptance. What can I do to protect my investment? Number one on the list. I think I've said it about 5,000 times already today. FEMA really wants us to push flood insurance. It makes sense. It's inexpensive compared to the amount of damage that you may be incurred. So take a look at that. The other thing a lot of people aren't aware of, don't delay. NFIP policies take up to 30 days to go into effect. So if a storm's coming and you run out and say, okay, the storm's going to be here in 5 days, I'm going to buy insurance policy for flood. Great, go ahead, but it won't cover the event that you're about to undergo, because it's a 30-day lag time, okay? So make sure that if you're going to buy flood insurance, that you do it before the hurricane season or before the rainy season, because it's going to take 30 days for that policy to take effect. If you want more information, you can obviously contact your insurance agent, but if you want more general information, floodsmart.gov is a great website. It has lots of information like I'm talking about, and a lot more in-depth information on insurance. So there's also a phone number if you don't like to go to websites. An interesting thing for your particular group is homeowners and renters insurance doesn't cover flood damage. So if your tenants have renters insurance in your buildings and they're affected by a flood, their insurance won't pay for it unless they have a separate flood policy. So that's something you may want to put in your documentation or discuss with your prospective tenants, that they may want to consider a contents coverage. When you get flood insurance, it only covers the structure, the building itself, unless you get a separate policy, flood policy, for contents. And it's a small percentage that's added to the original policy. If you do decide to get flood insurance here, because of our participation in the National Flood Insurance Program and the higher regulatory standards that I talked about earlier, all flood insurance policies issued in the high-risk zones here in Doral, special flood hazard area, receive a 15% discount on flood insurance rates. So that's a direct result of what we're doing here. FEMA says we're acting above their minimum regulations, so they determined that all the policies they're going to write here are going to get an automatic 15% discount. Okay, and that's for the efforts of the mayor, the council, and the manager putting all the resources behind this flood protection program. Well, the last slide we have here is you can't control the weather, but you can prepare for it. So again, it's all about preparation, knowing what you need, and providing it to us. That's my contact information. Any questions?
Yes, going back to the elevation certificates, I've had several tenants that they want their own flood insurance.
Right.
But we don't have a lot of elevation certificates for our buildings. Do they need the elevation certificate for the entire building, even though they're only insuring their unit?
Yes, because FEMA looks at it from a building. It doesn't matter if it's one unit. If one portion of the building is in the special flood hazard area or one portion of the building is damaged, it may affect the entire building. So yes, the elevation certificate is not issued for a unit, it's issued for the building. And the reason is that flood can damage the foundation and the utilities that service that building. So even if one unit is unaffected or the water didn't get in there, but if the flood waters damage the slab or the structure, then the building would be unsafe and you wouldn't be able to use it. Or if it broke, and we had this in Irma, if it broke the water supply or the sewage lines, you wouldn't be able to work in the building. And it wouldn't just be that one unit, it would be the whole building. So that's the reason why you have to have an elevation certificate for the whole building. Now, elevation certificates are not required to get flood insurance. However, a lot of insurance agents don't like to write flood insurance without it because they have to give them a much higher rate because they're unable to determine the risk without the elevation certificate. So they automatically get the highest rate. So that's a drawback for people that do want to insure if you don't have an elevation certificate. They can get the insurance, but they pay a much higher rate because they can't determine the risk. And the only way you can determine risk is by the elevation certificate.
Yeah, I usually tell them, just go ahead and pay for the elevation certificate for the whole building. But
Yeah.
they don't like that.
No, of course not, absolutely.
Find a solution for
Yeah, that's it, yeah, and that's the thing,
Yeah.
you know, if they do want to go through it and get the elevation certificate, it would be based on the whole building and they would have to pay for that. So, yeah, absolutely.
Mark, can you extend a
Question?
report on the
Yes, ma'am.
On the CRS and how we're working to increase that discount for everybody that lives and owns property here? I know we're at 7 right now.
Yes, we're at 7 with 15% discount, and I did mention earlier a consultant that we've hired to determine additional risk and do an analysis on our repetitive loss areas and our focus on the areas that are struggling with street flooding and structure flooding. The work with the consultant, we're working to move that to a class 6, which would be a 20% discount, and we're hoping to have that in effect by October of 2019. So, you know, all these activities, you know, that we're doing, we're documenting in order to try and increase our, get an additional discount for the flood insurance.
The lower the CRS number is,
The lower the CRS number is, the higher the discount is, okay? You start at class 10 and it goes all the way to a class 1. There's only 2 class 1s in the entire country, and they're in the mountainous and desert regions. So, you know, it's based on a very complicated formula that has to do with density, has to do with open space, has to do with a number of different factors, and it would be the lowest class here in the state of Florida is a class 4, and that's in Ocala, again, because they have open pastures. They have so much open land. We would be very difficult for us to get to a class 4 because we simply don't have the open land for the water storage for floodwaters. So it's all based on that. But again, to answer your question, we hopefully will be at a class 6 by October of 2019, and we're always looking for ways to improve, to bring that insurance lower. Any other questions?
will the slides be available on the website?
The slides, I'm working with Public Affairs, and this is, as you see, is being recorded. It will all be on Channel 77 locally, and we're going to be working to make these slides available on the website for download or review. Absolutely. The last thing I want to say is that I will be sending you an email with the links so you can click on there and pull the documentation early. We would like to offer you the opportunity to come in and sign up. When I send you the email, you can respond to me and I'll send you a link. You can sign up for a one-on-one meeting. You can come into my office with the documentation that you pulled for your files, and we'll sit down and we'll review it. We'll do, I'll do an assessment. and say, okay, you know, this is what we can do, and your documentation, this is what we need for it, keep it, and when you bring a permit, do it. So if you're interested in something like that, please sign up for that, and we can do an assessment, and yours is gonna take quite a while with the number of buildings that you have there. But we're happy to do that, and this is all part of the program. We'll do a one-on-one meeting and give you a personal assessment of your risk. Okay, absolutely. Anything else? Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Mark.